Hey everyone, it's Mojax back in the DJ City UK lab, and today I'm talking about DJing with an iPad. Now this is my iPad 2 from 2011. Since I got it, I've tried various different ways to incorporate it into my DJing. So I've used standalone mixing software, I've used it as an effects unit, I've used it for MIDI control with Lima and Serato Remote, I've even used it for visuals, but none of those uses ever really kind of panned out for me. It's just too limited, it's not very powerful, 16 gigabytes of storage, it just never really cut it. So this has been relegated to watching Netflix in bed, you know, the typical iPad use. But of course we've got a whole new generation of iPads now. This is my new iPad Pro, 12.9 inch display, A9 processor, so it's super fast. Retina display on there as well, looks absolutely beautiful, high resolution, and 128 gigabytes of storage. Now considering that most of my gigs I play off a 64 gig SD card or USB stick with Rekordbox, 128 is plenty in here. So I'm thinking, okay, this thing might well be ready for some proper DJ use now. And a company that agrees with that is Algoriddim, who make the DJ apps. So we've got DJ on iOS, DJ2 on iOS. They've also got DJ Pro on the Mac. Now I took a look at that earlier this year. I didn't do a review here on DJ City, basically because it's not a bad app by any means. It's pretty good really, and it's got some interesting stuff, like it's got Spotify integration and so on, and it works very well with the hardware it supports. But we're talking always here on DJ City to working professional DJs. You are already going to have a platform that you're invested in, and it's hard to recommend it to switchers, you know. So if you're a Traktor user, you're going to miss some of that crazy mapping stuff that goes on with Traktor, and of course the hardware like the S8 and the D2, you're going to miss that kind of stuff. If you're a Serato user, you're going to miss that massive ecosystem of hardware that's natively supported by Serato DJ. You know, so it's just hard to recommend for switchers. DJ Pro on the iPad, however, is a somewhat different proposition. It's a $30 app, although cheaper at launch, and brings all the advanced features from the OS X version to iOS with an interface designed for multi-touch. It renders at 1080p at 60 frames per second and looks gorgeous on the Retina display on the iPad Pro. There are loads of choices when it comes to views, and you can control up to 4 decks with manual beat matching, sync and even key sync. I'd rather see the Camelot notation for key rather than the musical notation, but the app seems to do a decent job of key detection in my testing. There are only 2 zoom settings for the waveforms, and I prefer to be able to pinch and zoom to the exact size I want, but that will be enough for most people. The analysis and beat gridding does a good job, and you can adjust the grid manually if it gets it wrong. My only issue with the grids is that the downbeat markers don't really stand out enough. A few times I loaded the track and thought the downbeat was correct, but when I pressed play it was off phrase, but that's easily fixed. You've got 8 cue points per deck, which snap to the grid if you set them whilst playing. The system for queuing up is a little strange coming from Traktor or Serato DJ, as you don't have the option to cue and pause with one button. It takes a bit of getting used to, although it will be familiar to users of earlier DJ apps. There are tons of options for looping. You can do beat loops from the decks themselves, and opening up the loop control panel gives you the ability to do bounce loops, basically loop rolls, loops controlled with an XY pad, or manual loops. In terms of effects, there is a basic set included, which sound decent enough, and again you have options for how you activate them, including an XY pad once again, and the instant effects mode, whereby you can activate a cool little effect sequence with one press. Very fun to play with. You can also pony up a bit extra for the additional packs of effects by Sugarbytes, who make the Tornado plugin. There are some very dope effects in the selection, and I'd say it's definitely worth the $10 in-app purchase to get them. One disappointment with the effects: no post fader. There's really no excuse for that in an environment which is entirely based on internal mixing, and so I hope Algoriddim do get that upgraded soon. It's a real handicap for what is otherwise a great sounding and accessible effects setup. Most of the interface is nicely optimised for touch, although a few controls could do with a bit of refinement. For example, it's hard to use the gain knobs accurately, as the actual decibel display is hidden under your finger. You can move your finger away whilst holding it down to get a clear view though. It's not all about touch with DJ Pro. They've also enabled control with keyboard shortcuts too. That works great on the iPad Pro Smart keyboard, and also with Bluetooth keyboards on any iPad running iOS 9. I was surprised to find they don't match the keyboard shortcuts from the Mac version. They're slightly different to accommodate the combination of keyboard and touch together. Of course, an important consideration when thinking about taking an iPad into a pro DJ environment is how to deal with multi-channel audio. On a basic level, you've got splitters like the Griffin DJ cable. I actually did a gig using that, but iPad headphone outputs are never the loudest thing going. A much better option is an audio interface like this one, also from Griffin. It's not perfect either though, as it lacks the ability to power your iPad. Years after the iPad came out, there are quite a few options for interfaces, but not that many which have the appropriate setup for DJ use. Hopefully the iPad Pro will lead to a resurgence in that field. Whilst touch and keyboard control is fine for a lot of situations, it's not right for everything. Scratching will always be a non-starter, for example, so real physical controls can come in handy. So the other device I used for testing was the Reloop BPad 2. Now this is not a budget controller, it's $600, but I was really impressed. They've clearly worked with Algoriddim to make the combination of app and controller really optimized, and using the two in tandem really does feel like you're missing nothing compared to a regular laptop setup. The only issue I had personally was the proprietary cable they used to connect to the iPad wasn't long enough to put the iPad Pro in the ideal place, as it won't fit in the dock part of the controller and that lead is mad short. So if you want a BPad 2, you'd be better off sticking to an iPad in the regular 10-inch form factor so it sits in the controller as it's meant to. But overall, the BPad 2 is great. Decent sound quality, plenty of inputs and outputs, great pads and good solid jog wheels. It's definitely my #1 choice amongst the iOS compatible controllers on the market. The library feels very iOS in that it's based on iTunes. I don't use iTunes for library management, so it was a hassle for me, but if you do, getting your playlists in will be a smooth operation. You can view tracks in the cloud from your iTunes account, and cues and other metadata sync between all the DJ apps and your devices via iCloud. That's a real potential time saver. One of the big selling points of DJ Pro is that you can play music from Spotify at the highest 320k quality they offer. Some caveats with that: you'll need a paid Spotify account. It only works when you're connected to the internet, even for tracks you've saved offline in the Spotify app. You can't record in the app when you're playing Spotify tracks, and you may find the licensing situation is a problem depending on where you live. But it certainly works. I played some Spotify tracks at a gig whilst tethered to my phone's 3G connection, and performance was flawless. Analysis is fast, and any cue points you set are saved to your metadata collection, just like with tracks in your library. The jury is still out full stop on DJing with streaming music right now, but this is definitely the best implementation I've seen, mainly down to the size of Spotify's catalogue. The last thing to mention is the video facilities in the app. There's so much going on here, it would take up a whole video on its own, but it's all pretty hardcore. You can add visuals to tracks, play video files right up to 4K, and mix and blend with all kinds of effects and transitions. You can even capture live footage from your camera. Very cool stuff, and I can see the app getting adopted by some video jocks just for those features alone. So there we have it, DJ Pro on the iPad. It's a pretty impressive bit of software really. Fundamentally it works very, very well. If anything, my only disappointment is it really works at its best when it is hooked up to something like the BPad 2. The combination of these two is like a good laptop and controller setup, works totally seamlessly, gives you all the functions you could want. From my point of view, I'm seeing the appeal of this really lying in just the touch interface alone. I want to see a few tweaks to that. I want to be able to pitch bend on the waveforms and that kind of stuff. Also to be able to have a proper split output on here, so I could run 2 or 4 decks through an audio interface directly on individual channels on a hardware mixer, and use the mixer for the mixing side, just use this for your transport and your control, and then we're talking about something very interesting, because that's a super portable setup. Even with a big iPad Pro, still fit that in your bag, pair of headphones, audio interface. That's going to be a pretty interesting experience. So I'm excited to see where they go. I think it's going to be just as popular as the older versions of DJ have been on iOS, because fundamentally it's nice and accessible, but this version's got those pro features that you want. We'll come back to iPad DJing on the channel. We will look at that. I'm going to play with this a lot more in the coming months, and we'll revisit it sometime in 2016 and just see how it's progressed and what kind of hardware's out there and that sort of thing, because it's an interesting topic. You know, these are real powerful computers that almost fit in your pocket. So yeah, the future's interesting for sure. Thank you very much for watching today. Make sure you subscribe for all our future tips, tricks and product reviews. I'll see you soon.